Thanks for staying up later. We're joined tonight by author Martin Amis, who's a bestseller on both sides of the Atlantic with books like Money and London Fields, and his newest is called Time's Arrow. We'll talk about that in just a little bit. His work has been compared to Flaubert and Joyce, and not frivolously. No less an authority than Saul Bellow more or less endorses that compliment. The New York Times said this about Martin Amis: Amis is probably fiction's angriest writer. In Britain, with its long and decorous literary tradition, his voice stands out discordantly from the rest like a boombox at a harpsichord recital. Were they on the money?
I like to think so, yeah. I mean, the English scene and the English novel are so quiet that you don't have to be very noisy to stand out. And certainly in England, I'm considered discordant in an American kind of way. And the result is that over here in America, I feel I have, in a way, a more natural audience than the audience I've left behind in England.
You spent at least a portion of your formative years in the United States. How important to your work do you think that was?
Very important just in that it gives you the confidence to write about America. It took me 4 novels. It was not until my 5th novel that I tiptoed out of England and set foot in the United States in a work of fiction. And I was delighted once I'd made the jump and found I could. You know, many English novelists come to America and they think that if they have a couple of Americans saying, "Have a nice day," or "You're welcome," that they've more or less done it. And that's the job of rendering America has been accomplished. I feel there's more to it than that. And listening to America and transcribing the way people talk is something that an outsider does very nervously. But having spent a bit of my childhood here, I think I had the confidence to get over that hurdle.
Is there among writers the same sort of general insecurity that you usually see attributed to performers, or even writers who have had significant critical successes, always saying to themselves, do I really deserve this? And somebody compared me to Flaubert and Joyce, but do I really deserve to be compared with some guy who writes pulp novels?
I think all artists are basically, of whatever kind, are basically on a knife edge. I think it was Baudelaire called the arts the delirious professions, in that you're living out of your delirium, and any attack on you, any criticism, any mild criticism in the press is an attack on your very essence, as well as on your, the food in your children's mouths. So, of course, they're precarious in that way. I think I don't really feel that myself because I'm the son of a writer, and it's never seemed to me a remarkable way of earning a living, although it clearly is a remarkable way, in that what is a writer? A writer is someone whose thoughts and feelings have a kind of currency, that what you think and feel and write about is, for some reason, of general interest. Now, if I were the son of a coal miner or even a nobleman, I think I would be constantly very impressed that what I was thinking and feeling had this effect. Being the son of a writer, throughout my childhood, seeing my father disappear into a study and every 2 years there'd be a new book, seemed to me a reasonable way to behave. But it isn't.
Your father, Kingsley Amis, was a very well-regarded author.
Still is.
Still is, but most of what he's known for came, I guess, in the 50s and 60s. It is said, I've read, that he's never finished one of your books.
Yeah, he read one a long time ago. And people like to think there's a lot of animosity and competitiveness between us, but in fact, we get on very like any father and son, get on rather well with lots of disagreements, but see a lot of each other and fond of each other. He can't read my stuff. he claims because he can't follow it. And as he gets older, he reads more and more thrillers, and he once said to me that he's never going to read another novel that doesn't begin with the sentence, "A shot rang out." If it fails that test, he slings it across the room. But I think that's very natural, though. I think it's very natural that I should admire his stuff, and very natural that he should be very suspicious of my stuff. I mean, on the whole, you're grateful to older writers, and you honor them, but you're very resentful of younger writers. You hate to see these little bastards coming up behind you, you know. And in that sense, in that delirious sense, you think, these people are taking money out of my pocket. And
as a point of reference, probably the best-known work by Kingsley Amis, at least here in America, would be Lucky Jim. If your own father gives you less than wholehearted approval, doesn't that inoculate you a little bit against other criticisms?
Yeah, actually, I've never thought of that. I mean, Freud said that what we spend all our lives doing is trying to impress our fathers. And I failed to do that very early on. So that may also be an element. But it's actually his example, I think, that rather than his disapproval, in that, you know, again, I'm insulated because I see what a writing life is like. I have friends, writer friends, who, after a bad review, will seek the fetal position for 3.5 hours. I don't get that. It annoys me for 5 minutes, and then it's gone.
Saul Bellow said that he understood the choice you've made, if choice is the right word. He said you can go about writing in a fashion where the language is subordinate to character and plot, or you can let out the throttle and let the language and the peculiarities of your style sometimes overwhelm the structure of the story. He said Flaubert did it, Joyce did it. Therein he sees the comparisons. Nabokov, he sees a comparison there as well. So I've asked you to pick something out of one of your books that you think kind of captures your style. And if you want to read a passage or comment on what Bellow said, or...
Sure, well, I think I'd better read a passage. This is about a sort of horror baby that is born to an upper-class couple in London. At one stage, they leave him at home and go away on doctor's advice, their doctors rather than the child. The change was all very sudden. Guy and Hope went out one day, leaving the usual gastroenteritic nightmare slobbering on the kitchen floor. They returned after lunch to find Marmaduke strolling around the drawing room with his hands in his pockets, watched by several speechless nannies. He had never crawled. Instead, he appeared to have worked it out that he could cause much more trouble and have much more fun in a state of peak fitness. His first move was to dispense with his midnight nap. The Clinchers hired more help, or they tried. An ailing baby was one thing. A strappingly malevolent toddler was quite another. Up until now, Guy and Hope's relationship to the child and to each other had been largely paramedical. After Marmaduke's renaissance, it became, well, you wouldn't say paramilitary, you'd say military. The only people they could get who stayed longer than an hour or two were male nurses sacked from lunatic asylums. Around the house these days, there was a kind of SWAT team of burly orderlies, as well as a few scarred nannies and au pairs. Dazedly, yet without bitterness, Guy calculated that Marmaduke, now in his 9th month, had already cost him £250,000.
Now, if somebody had never read London Fields, but had read a considerable amount of your other work, they would recognize that instantly as Martin Amis. Is that true, to one extent or another, of any good writer?
It's true of the good writers I like. You will find many a writer who, for some reason, has taken a kind of vow of poverty with his style, who will shear away all kinds of ornament and give you something that's supposedly as clear as a mountain creek kind of thing. Mm-hmm. But the vow of poverty is it's easier for a pauper to make a vow of poverty than it is for a prince. And I like the writers like John Updike, Bellow, for instance, who are happy in their counting houses.
Is there a danger of just getting carried away with your own dexterity?
There's some critic once insultingly said that every sentence of mine has a sort of logo and a sort of copyright sign at the bottom of it. But that doesn't bother me. I think what Saul Bellow meant when he talked about writers letting language do a lot of the work is really what one's trying to do is develop a voice. Novels are all about voices. What you're looking for in a novel is the right voice in the right place at the right time. Writing neat little formal campus novels that are designed like a restaurant with pleasant decor and everything matching everything else. Any writer knows after a few years in the job that that's easy. What's difficult is to try and find a voice and a rhythm.
We're with English novelist Martin Amis. What's the capacity of a piece of literature to reshape society in the 1990s? I'm just thinking of a few here, and not necessarily equal in quality, but an Uncle Tom's Cabin, or the muckraking stuff of a Sinclair Lewis, or maybe Ralph Ellison's Invisible Man, or maybe Steinbeck and Grapes of Wrath, in a different time when there wasn't television and there weren't these other influences. It's at least our impression through the rearview mirror that these works reshaped society. Even if people of equal talent are working today, are they in an environment where they can't have the same impact? I mean, one television show, one trend in popular culture seems to reach and move more people than even the finest work of literature.
That's true, but on the other hand, look around and we have the book on, they're not necessarily fiction books, but we have the book on euthanasia. We have Robert Bly's book about manhood. We have American Psycho by Bret Easton Ellis. We have the most famous and influential novel of all time, The Satanic Verses. Novels are capable of causing a stir. It's nearly always for the wrong reasons. It does seem that people are getting too cranky and touchy to read a novel and to regard it as something clear and pure and not necessarily touching on their lives. People read it, it would seem, in a state of red alert now, and an alarm bell is ready to go off whenever these buzzwords are mentioned. It isn't the healthiest kind of, it's not the healthiest kind of literary receptivity, but it does show that the books do have terrific currency and power still.
You said that people tend to read novels now for various reasons in a state of red alert, and that was more or less your defense when feminists charged you with being a misogynist. Somebody said, I got to get this thing here. Martin Amis is okay if you're a man, but thinking women take exception to his sweaty descriptions of underwear. And you are very, very graphic when it comes to sexual maneuvers.
Yeah, actually what I mainly am is comic when it comes to sexual maneuvers. But I hear the sisters and I hear what they're saying. And I would just, I think there isn't a difficulty. I know, I can spot a woman hater at 500 yards, and I ain't one. And I know from the letters I get from my women readers that they understand that too. The women readers who have trouble with my stuff are politicized and necessarily politicized at this time. I remember I wrote a long piece about AIDS and got politicized about it in that, I read a lot of the literature. And I wanted to write a piece, and did, I hope, that made things very much easier. It was when the AIDS idea was breaking in England, around '84. At the same time, I got a proof of a story I'd just written where the narrator uses the word faggot. And I remember the sort of armpit-igniting shame I felt at seeing this word. 10 minutes later, I okayed the proof and sent it off because it was right for the story and right for the character. But I was politicized, and an alarm bell went off in my head when I saw that word. I thought, not now, But I realized that that's not how you read a story. These local passions, these historical movements can't determine the way you write. You've got to write it as you see it, as your characters see it. But I enjoy writing about women. In London Fields particularly, I felt that the manipulating heroine was actually more in control of the novel than I was, that she was cleverer than I was, that she knew more of the angles than I did. I felt very at home writing about her.
But of course, if those manipulations cross over into sex, as they do, then you enter that area where...
alarm bells go off.
Exactly.
On the other hand, I've had many women readers say, how come you understand women so well? I mean, I think I write about, my main defense about being anti-women is that I'm just anti-person, you know. I'm anti-men, too, because look at my male characters, if you want a real gallery of horrors. I write about the less attractive aspects of human beings, is the truth of it, men and women. You know, the mendacious, the tricksy, the calculating.
So that brings us to London Fields, set near the coming turn of the century. You might call it Apocalypse Next. Mm-hmm. There's an impending Holocaust. In fact, the character you mentioned before, this Nicola Six, she refers to her alter ego as Enola Gay, which of course was the plane that carried the bombs that were dropped on Hiroshima. And society is disintegrating at every level.
Yeah, with all that, it is still a comedy. And it was really, what may be said at the end of the millennium is that, you know, societies tend to go nuts when the big figures appear on the calendar. They went nuts in 1899, in 1799. They even go nuts when it's 49. So now we have an authentic millennium coming up, and you can sort of feel the world getting ready to go nuts.
In London Fields, one of the characters says, it's hard to love when you're bracing for impact.
Yeah. I mean, for the first time, we are quite unlike all the people that came before us in history in that the sense of an ending has settled on this planet. The idea that the planet would somehow run out would have made as much sense to a 15th century farmer as it would have made to the dog who was sleeping at his feet. The planet was a given, and an eternal given. Now, through either bang or whimper, that the sense of an ending is here. It's arrived. It's part of everyone's life. And I do feel, you know, stepping back, I do feel that a kind of possibility of death, omnipresence of a death idea, makes it very tough for love, because it's hard to feel love when you're fearing for your own existence.
Briefly to the upcoming book, Time's Arrow. Very interesting premise. Nazi doctor, his life being rewound. In a way, I guess you could say that if you rewind some good deeds and look at them backwards, they would appear to be horrible. If you rewound atrocities, they would be wonderful. You'd be pulling people out of the oven and restoring them to their families and back to their homes and their true identities.
Well, that's it. But it turns out that if you turn Time's arrow around, if you have time traveling the other way in a backwards physical universe, that morality is reversed. So that in a backwards physical world, to be a doctor is to commit atrocity upon atrocities. It's, in a backwards world, you go out of hospital in much worse shape than when you came in. But if you approach something, an atrocity and a calamity like Auschwitz, then Auschwitz was such an inverted world that if you do it backwards, then it comes out as a miracle. So as you say, they're taking people out of the ovens, restoring them with gas, putting their dental gold back in, putting hair on them, putting them into clothes, taking their tattoo off, reuniting them with their families, sending them back to the ghettos, reintegrating them into German society, and making German society whole. Now, the premise for the book really is that the Nazis went about what they did with a kind of biomedical vision of healing Germany. They didn't regard themselves as 2 million Charles Mansons having an orgy of cowardly sadism. They thought they were doing a tough job that needed to be done to heal Germany. It's even been called a biocratic vision. And what I'm saying, I suppose, is that they would have been right. Everything they said about their project would have been true if Time's Arrow went the other way. In other words, that's how wrong they got it.
Martin Amos's book, Time's Arrow, published by Crown, is out now, and we're out of here. Thanks for coming by. Appreciate it. See you later.